April 1943, northern Tunisia. The light came up hard and white over the Sahel, turning the olive groves to smudges and the flats to mirrors of heat. From a rocky fold south of Matur, Oberleutnant Kurt Schaefer of the 24th Panzer-Division raised his Zeiss binoculars and felt the familiar sting of blown sand on his cheeks. Dust plumes unrolled across the plain. He expected the boxy silhouettes of British armored cars. Instead, the glass filled with small open vehicles that skipped between wadis like water striders, weaving through camel thorn and salt crust before his Kübelwagen driver could even pick a line. Their engines had a higher note than the Horch staff car idling behind him. The sound carried thin and insistent over the popping of distant small arms fire, like a carpenter's saw biting knotty wood. Schaefer lowered the optics once, frowned, and lifted them again. The shapes were wrong for anything in his recognition book. Canvas tops peeled back, windshields folded, antenna masts quivering. Men rode sideways on the rear, boots knocking against jerry cans. Another crouched over a radio set, a hand cupped to the earpiece. The first reports crackled through the regimental net. Kleine, amerikanische Wagen, sehr schnell. By mid-morning, the fight shifted east toward the Sebket el Arena, where the hardpan broke into pockets of powder and the Sd.Kfz. 222 scout cars began to nose and dig. Their 20mm guns barked, but traversing onto the darting intruders proved maddening at close range. Across the flats, the little American machines, by now Schaefer could see a stenciled star on one hood, sidled along gullies and burst out where the ground turned firm. Some carried litter frames lashed at the rear, a corporal's hand steadying a bandaged man whose boots dragged an inch above the ruts. Others bristled with tubes that looked like plumbing until fire flashed from the muzzle. Rocket launchers, the staff whispered later, 2 36-inch bazookas fed from canvas bags. A pair halted just long enough for a radio man to extend a whip aerial and murmur into a handset. 5 minutes on, shells walked in along a hedgerow where a Panzer III had stuck to the belly plate. "They call guns like hounds," a Gefreiter wrote that evening, "and run before the leash pulls tight." Near noon, the Kübelwagen tires slewed in flowery sand as Schaefer's driver tried to keep pace. The American quarter-tonners did not slow. They flicked through camel tracks, climbed with short, surprising torque, and dropped into cover while our heavier cars hunted for firm ground. In the heat that smelled of clutch dust and hot oil, the division's creed, move first, hit fast, felt suddenly borrowed from someone else. By late afternoon, a captured specimen stood under a tarpaulin in a date palm shade, its hood up, its flathead 4-cylinder marked Willys. The technical note drafted that night logged 60 horsepower, 4-4 drive, a low-range gear that bit like a winch, and a rated load that belied the men and radios it actually carried. The conclusion, brisk and confident on paper, called it ein Spielzeug, a toy, unsuitable for frontline work. Days later, as April wore on and the Axis perimeter shrank toward Bizerte, the toy kept skirting the edges of the maps. It appeared where mine flags clustered, nosed along drainage ditches, and vanished in palms before a battery commander could adjust his lenses. Kübelwagens, with their light frames and excellent manners on firm roads, bogged to the belly when frost-shattered crust gave way. The American 404, with its short wheelbase and low gearing, seemed to float just enough to make the difference. Reports from patrol leaders grew clipped. Enemy scouts flanking left. Artillery following their signals. Armored cars losing contact. "Schneller als der Staub," a sergeant muttered, faster than the dust. Under the African sun, the myth that German speed alone governed the battlefield took on a hairline crack. When the last gun spoke over the hills west of Tunis at month's end, Schaefer passed the confiscated Willys to an ordnance team for a fuller look. The verdict would travel up channels, tidy and dismissive, while the memory of being outmaneuvered by something no taller than a man's shoulder refused to fade. The quiet revolution had announced itself not with armor plate, but with movement multiplied, radios where you needed them, rockets where you did not expect them, wounded carried out before fear could set. The months ahead would carry that lesson off this continent. From Tunisian salt flats to Sicilian limestone lanes, the little 4x4 was already pointing toward the next shoreline. September 1939, Poland burned beneath the weight of something new. Dawn after dawn, villagers woke to the metallic thunder of engines rolling faster than any army in memory. Dust clouds trailed columns of Panzer IIs and IIIs, half-tracks, and lean gray trucks pushing east under banners of black crosses. Radios chattered in perfect tempo, Luftwaffe Stukas screamed ahead, and within days entire divisions seemed to vanish behind waves of mechanized fire. The German word Blitzkrieg, lightning war, entered the lexicon as both strategy and warning. Mobility had replaced attrition. Where the First World War had dug itself into trenches, the Second exploded into motion. The Wehrmacht's armored spearheads pierced Poland in 5 weeks, and by June 1940, France collapsed beneath their speed. Victory itself seemed measured in kilometers per hour, but the creed of movement carried a hidden fragility. By 1941, as German columns lunged across Russia and fanned through North Africa, the logistics began to fray. The sleek Sd.Kfz 231 8-wheel armored car could sprint at 85 kilometers per hour on roads, but only as long as its tires held and its delicate steering didn't choke on sand. The lighter Sd.Kfz 222, prized for reconnaissance, bogged down in soft terrain, its 20mm cannon impressive yet useless when stuck axle deep. Fuel convoys lagged. Spare parts vanished into the horizon. The same mobility that once conquered Europe now became a chain. Across the Atlantic, American officers watched and took notes. What they saw was not invincibility, but vulnerability, the difference between speed and endurance. In July 1940, the U.S. Quartermaster Corps issued a challenge. Design a light reconnaissance vehicle under 1,300 pounds, able to climb 40-degree slopes, ford creeks, carry radios and a .30 caliber gun, and keep moving across mud, ice, or dunes. 75 firms were invited. Most dismissed it as fantasy. Only 2, American Bantam and Willys Overland, met the deadline. In those blueprints lay the quiet answer to Blitzkrieg. The Germans had proven that speed could win battles. The Americans would prove that reliability could win wars. By late 1941, the prototype had shed its civilian skin and become the Willys MB, compact, square-shouldered, and utterly utilitarian. What appeared at first glance to be little more than a box on wheels concealed one of the most efficient engineering feats of the war. Beneath its flat hood throbbed the 134 cubic inch Go Devil engine, a 60-horsepower 4-cylinder that pulled far above its weight. The entire vehicle weighed just over 2,450 pounds, yet could carry nearly the same load again in soldiers, stretchers, or crates of ammunition. Its top speed of 65 kilometers per hour made it faster than most half-tracks on a straight road. And its ground clearance, 8.25 inches, let it climb ridges, ford streams, and cut through rutted terrain where tanks bogged and armored cars broke axles. Unlike German machines, which wore their power as armor and weight, the Willys MB's greatest defense was its mobility. The open chassis and light frame offered no protection from bullets, but they gave something rarer in mechanized war, choice of direction. Its instantly engageable 4-wheel drive transformed mud, snow, and gravel from obstacles into invitations. It could pivot within a circle barely 5 meters wide, snake through trees, or haul a 37mm gun up a hillside. Where the Wehrmacht's Sd.Kfz 250 series demanded careful road selection and constant maintenance, the Jeep treated the battlefield like open country. Its genius lay in what it lacked. The Willys could be stripped and repaired with a wrench and 2 hands. A field mechanic could change the oil in minutes or replace an entire engine in under an hour. Bolts, filters, and spark plugs were standardized. One Jeep's failure became another's spare part. This modular simplicity made it immortal in motion. The Germans called it a toy. The Allies called it a workhorse. By the end of 1945, nearly 650,000 would roll off assembly lines shared by Willys and Ford, a number the Axis could never match. The Blitzkrieg had exalted speed as a weapon. The Jeep transformed speed into a companion. The next chapter would prove that philosophy in the crucible of North Africa's sand and fire. By November 1942, the Desert War had become a chessboard of mirages. Operation Torch landed American troops in Morocco and Algeria, and with them came the small square silhouettes of Willys MBs lashed to transport decks and rolling down sandy causeways. Under the banners of the newly formed US-2 Corps, these unarmored workhorses met their trial against Rommel's Africa Corps, veterans of 3 years of desert maneuver who knew every trick of the sun and sand. Between Kasserine Pass and Gafsa, where the land shimmered like hammered copper, the Jeep began to earn its legend. The temperature climbed beyond 45 degrees Celsius. Fuel trucks boiled over and German half-tracks shuddered under the strain. Yet the Willys kept moving, its Go-Devil engine humming a steady counterpoint to the roar of panzers. The little vehicles became the lifeblood of mobility. They darted from command posts to forward outposts, ferrying scouts, dispatch riders, and stretchers under fire. In the confusion of Kasserine, when units lost contact and maps meant little, officers trusted the Jeep more than their compasses. It clawed up ravines, coasted down gravel fans, and slid over dunes that swallowed heavier machines. Small enemy cars operating without regard to roads or tracks, one captured German report complained, an observation equal parts astonishment and frustration. Even the vaunted Sd.Kfz 222 armored car, with its 8mm autocannon and all-wheel drive, bogged where the Jeep's low-range gears crawled free. To the north, British long-range desert group patrols took the Jeep's potential to an art form. Stripped of windshields and doors, mounted with twin Vickers K-guns and extra fuel cans, they vanished into the Libyan wastes to ambush convoys and destroy fuel depots hundreds of miles behind enemy lines. No German machine could match their reach. For Rommel's scouts, these small phantoms blurred the line between nuisance and nightmare, machines that appeared from nowhere and left only tracks the wind erased. When Kasserine exposed American greenness and command chaos, one constant remained. The Jeep started every morning. Its endurance became a lesson written in sand and oil. The men who drove it learned to trust that sound, the thin hum that meant connection, speed, and survival. Those lessons would cross oceans, carrying the Jeep from Africa's heat to Europe's cold. The next section explores how the Axis struggled to decipher and imitate the riddle that rolled beneath the desert sun. By early 1943, German field intelligence had begun to notice a pattern that defied doctrine. In after-action reports from Tunisia and later Sicily, officers of the Wehrmacht's reconnaissance branches described an unnerving new breed of enemy mobility. The phrase appeared again and again in dispatches. Leicht motorisierte Kräfte, light motorized forces, small groups moving in erratic patterns, turning up behind minefields on goat paths, and even through dried riverbeds that panzer patrols had written off as impassable. Prisoners taken near Gela and Kasserine spoke freely about the Jeep, a four-wheeled contraption that carried wire reels, stretchers, mortars, or machine guns depending on the day. "Everything fits," one interrogated corporal explained, gesturing with his hands. "It is like a soldier's pocket knife on wheels." At first, German officers dismissed such tales as exaggerations born of defeat. But when intact specimens began to fall into their hands, skepticism gave way to curiosity, and then respect. Reports from Italy's 10th Army acknowledged the uncomfortable truth. These small cars can outflank positions inaccessible to armored vehicles. On mountain tracks above Salerno, Jeeps scrambled where the heavier Sd.Kfz 250 half-tracks spun out or snapped axles. The Wehrmacht tried to answer in kind. Engineers refined the Volkswagen Type 82 Kübelwagen, simpler, cheaper, but rear-wheel drive and too light for rough climbs, and tested the amphibious Schwimmwagen, which swam but lacked the Jeep's rugged torque. Both served capably, yet neither achieved the Willys' balance of traction, speed, and field reparability. By late 1943, Luftwaffe reconnaissance squadrons were tasked with photographing Jeep tracks to estimate Allied patrol routes. A reversal few could have imagined in 1940. The Blitzkrieg myth, that mobility was Germany's alone, had been quietly dismantled. Even German propaganda turned defensive. Newspapers printed photos of captured jeeps with captions mocking enemy wastefulness, but to frontline troops, the message rang hollow. Those small American cars meant communication, coordination, and reach the Axis could no longer match. By the time the Allies landed in Normandy, every German commander knew the outline of that flat hood, and folded windshields signaled more than another vehicle. It meant the enemy's advance was already in motion. The next section reveals how mass production transformed that symbol of adaptability into the backbone of a global army. Between 1941 and 1945, American industry achieved a mechanical miracle that even the architects of Blitzkrieg could scarcely have imagined. In less than 4 years, over 640,000 Jeeps rolled from the assembly lines of Willys Overland and Ford Motor Company. The two firms worked from standardized blueprints so precise that a bolt made in Toledo would fit seamlessly into a chassis built in Dearborn. The only difference between their products lay in the data plate on the dashboard, Willys MB or Ford GPW. Each machine was a duplicate of the next, designed not for luxury or protection, but for relentless function. At just under $750 per unit, a Jeep cost less than the paint on a German Tiger tank and a tiny fraction of the Sd.Kfz 250 half-track, whose price soared above $10,000. The secret was interchangeability. Axles, transmissions, engines, and even seat bolts could be swapped between models without a single tool modification. When a shipment arrived overseas, the vehicles came in crates, frames nested, wheels stacked. Soldiers could assemble a Jeep in 4 hours using only wrenches and determination. Photographs from 1943 show GIs bolting together their transports on docks from Oran to Brisbane as though building toys out of steel. Crates marked Willys MB, complete unit, became as common a sight in convoy manifests as rifles or rations. By 1944, Jeeps had become the connective tissue of Allied warfare. They roamed the jungles of Burma, the rubble of Italy, the hedgerows of Normandy, and the coral atolls of the Pacific. General Eisenhower later ranked it among the 3 decisive weapons of the war, alongside the C-47 transport and the atomic bomb. While Allied factories ran day and night, German industry groaned under bombing raids, fuel shortages, and misdirected priorities toward heavy armor. The result was paradoxical. The nation that had pioneered mobility now choked on immobility. The United States, by flooding the world with simple four-wheelers, restored motion to modern war. The Jeep was no longer just a vehicle, it was momentum made manifest. The next section follows that motion across continents. From Sicily's dust to Normandy's dawn, by 1944, the Jeep was no longer merely a reconnaissance tool, it had become the pulse of the Allied advance. In the shattered valleys of Italy, its tires chewed through mud slick with rain and rubble, climbing where mules once labored. At Monte Cassino, under the unending thunder of German guns, Jeeps threaded through shell-pocked streets to deliver ammunition and evacuate the wounded. Their open tops offered no shelter, yet drivers trusted their speed and smallness more than armor. You could feel the shells before you heard them, one American private recalled. But the Jeep always got us through. The little machine turned chaos into connection, bridging gaps between infantry, artillery, and command as armies learned to move like organisms instead of columns. In Normandy, the Jeep came into its own as the perfect weapon of adaptation. The thick hedgerows that trapped Sherman tanks proved no barrier to its low, narrow frame. Jeeps towing 57mm anti-tank guns crawled through gaps where heavier armor could not pass, ambushing German half-tracks at point-blank range. Entire motor pools at Eisenhower's headquarters ran on fleets of Jeeps. A general could reach the front in 20 minutes where a staff car might take 3 hours. They became both messenger and mule, bearing radio operators, engineers, and stretcher cases across terrain that defied logic. During Operation Cobra in July 1944, as American armor broke out of Normandy, engineer squads rode in sandbag-muffled Jeeps to clear mines and mark safe lanes for tanks to follow. When German resistance finally fractured, those same vehicles became predators. Racing ahead of armored spearheads, they seized bridges and cut off convoys along the Loire and Seine. Reports from the 2nd SS Panzer, Division lamented enemy vehicles of unusual speed and flexibility, a bureaucratic phrasing that barely masked astonishment. The Blitzkrieg ideal, once Germany's proudest doctrine, had been turned back upon its creators. The Jeep's unarmored body proved that agility could outfight armor. Its reliability made every road an avenue of pursuit. German soldiers later said they could hear the Allies coming long before they saw them, the faint insect-like hum of engines at dawn that meant the front was moving again. From Normandy's tangled bocage to the teeth of the Siegfried Line, the Jeep became the sound of liberation itself. The next section explores how that sound shaped morale on both sides of the line. To the men who fought with it, the Jeep was more than a machine, it was a companion. On every front from the Apennines to the Ardennes, soldiers gave theirs names painted in white across the hood. Betsy, Iron Horse, Lil Satan, Faithful. Crews draped helmets over headlights, lashed extra jerry cans to the rear, and tied ration boxes where a back seat should have been. They treated the Jeep not as equipment, but as something alive, a creature that grumbled, endured, and somehow always found a way forward. In letters home, GIs wrote of sleeping under its chassis during rain, of trusting it to carry the wounded when stretchers failed, of how its engine's steady hum was the only constant sound in a world of artillery and uncertainty. "It's the one thing that feels alive out here," one corporal wrote from Italy in 1944. For the Germans, that same sound carried a different meaning. The whine of small engines at dawn meant encirclement. Wherever they withdrew, over hills, through shattered villages, across mine-ribboned fields, the Jeep appeared first. Axis intelligence called them schnell Patrouillenfahrzeuge, fast patrol vehicles that seemed immune to terrain or fatigue. Reports from the Italian front warned of small enemy columns penetrating deep into sectors once thought secure, spreading confusion far beyond their size. The Jeep's presence blurred the notion of a front line. Nowhere felt safe, not even rear echelons. A weapon that was not meant to terrify, instead, became a symbol of relentless pursuit. To Allied soldiers, the Jeep represented movement and connection. To their enemies, it signaled inevitability. In that inversion lay the war's quiet triumph. The Blitzkrieg's myth of German mastery through speed had been broken and repurposed by the very men it once sought to overwhelm. From that point onward, mobility would no longer mean conquest, but coordination. The next section explores how this new philosophy of movement reshaped strategy and forever changed the nature of modern warfare. The Jeep's legacy was not measured in horsepower alone, but in how it rewrote the very grammar of modern warfare. Before its arrival, generals thought of movement as something achieved by armor, heavy thrusts, columns of tanks, deliberate progress. By 1944, that idea had shifted. The Jeep made mobility personal, immediate, and distributed. Commanders no longer needed entire armored divisions to seize initiative. A handful of Jeeps could scout, flank, and relay orders in real time. This shift transformed strategy from massed power to coordinated agility. The battlefield, once defined by front lines, became a web of motion. During the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, the Jeep's worth was proven in frost and blood. In blizzards that stalled tanks and froze artillery grease, Jeeps clawed through snowbound forests to reach Bastogne, delivering ammunition, rations, and medical supplies to the encircled 101st Airborne. With their engines wrapped in blankets and muffled under sandbags to avoid detection, drivers guided by instinct and dim headlights kept lifelines open through nights of sub-zero cold. Those small machines, groaning under the weight of shells and wounded, helped hold a salient that defined the winter campaign. Their low silhouettes allowed them to slip through fog for surprise ambushes or rapid repositioning, tactics that armored vehicles could not match. Patton's Third Army took the lesson to its extreme. Thousands of Jeeps surged across France in flanking drives so swift that German reports compared them to the Panzers of 1940, except now the speed belonged to the enemy. The Jeep had turned Blitzkrieg's principle inside out: movement without armor, communication without delay, unpredictability without waste. Soviet observers studying Lend-Lease convoys noted with admiration that the Jeep embodied the American art of improvisation. It redefined mechanization itself. Victory came not from who struck hardest, but from who adapted fastest. The myth of German mechanical genius gave way to Allied pragmatism. Yet even this perfect design faced its limits, as new terrain and missions demanded evolution. The next section examines how soldiers modified the Jeep to meet challenges across every corner of the war. For all its triumphs, the Jeep was never invincible. Its genius came from lightness, and that lightness carried danger. With no armor plating, even a rifle bullet could pierce its thin skin, and a single mortar fragment could shred its canvas seats. Drivers learned to keep their speed and luck as their only defense. Mines were deadlier still. A hidden pressure plate could toss the half-ton frame skyward. In the soaked fields of northern France and the Low Countries, narrow tires dug themselves into ruts until mud swallowed the axles. The same men who praised the Jeep's freedom also cursed it knee-deep in sludge, tugging at ropes and shovels under freezing rain. But soldiers adapted. They strapped sand ladders to the sides, fitted tire chains scavenged from trucks, or wedged logs beneath the wheels for grip. Improvisation was not an emergency measure, it became doctrine. As the war widened, so did the Jeep's roles. The amphibious GPA Seep, a floating variant with a boat-shaped hull, splashed across rivers from Sicily to the Scheldt, though its poor handling earned more laughter than faith. Ambulance conversions carried stretchers over terrain where trucks dared not go, while British SAS patrols in North Africa stripped their Jeeps bare and bristled them with twin 50-caliber Brownings and extra fuel drums, turning them into desert raiders capable of ambushing airfields deep behind lines. In every workshop, soldiers welded, sawed, and reimagined their machines. Radios, stretchers, anti-tank launchers, even snowplows appeared on that same frame. The Germans, ever pragmatic, captured hundreds and repainted them with Balkenkreuz markings for infiltration missions during the Ardennes offensive. Yet even under enemy colors, the Jeep's spirit betrayed its origins. It was too versatile, too alive to belong to one army. By late 1944, new designs like the Dodge WC and post-war successors hinted at evolution, but none captured the balance of simplicity and daring that made the Willys MB immortal. Its weaknesses had forced innovation, and innovation had won the war. When the guns finally fell silent, the little four-wheeler had outlasted empires and defined how every army thereafter would move. The next section traces how that legacy endured beyond victory. When the guns finally went silent in 1945, the Jeep did not retire. It simply changed uniforms. The same machine that had stormed through Sicily, raced down French lanes, and forded the Rhine returned to rebuild what it had once helped destroy. Rebranded as the CJ, or Civilian Jeep, it became the first vehicle to bridge war and peace. In the shattered landscapes of Europe, its squat frame pulled plows through fields still littered with shell casings, hauled bricks to rebuild towns, and ferried doctors across roads that no longer existed. In occupied Germany, the irony was unmistakable. The very symbol of Allied mobility now powered the reconstruction of the nation that had first worshipped speed as a weapon. For veterans, the Jeep became memory-made metal. Many brought them home or bought surplus units, using them on farms, in forests, or on open roads. They painted names from battle days, teaching children to drive the same machines that once crossed fire-swept rivers. Its ruggedness became a metaphor for endurance, and soon the Jeep was more than a tool. It was freedom on four wheels. Hollywood noticed, and the image of the open-top vehicle cutting through wilderness became part of post-war mythology. Militarily, nearly every nation imitated its design. Britain's Land Rover, France's Hotchkiss M201, and Japan's Mitsubishi Jeep were all born from the Willys mold. Even the Soviet Gaz series carried echoes of its form. Strategists studying the war recognized what the Jeep had proven, that true mobility came not from armor or size, but from reliability, adaptability, and reach. The United States had defeated Blitzkrieg not by matching its tanks, but by outpacing its philosophy. The myth of German mechanized invincibility had collapsed beneath tenacious wheels that refused to stop turning. What began in North Africa's dust ended as a blueprint for modern movement, a revolution disguised as simplicity. The final section returns to that desert ridge. where one German officer first watched disbelief turn to realization. In the end, the myth of Blitzkrieg, the vision of armored thunder and flawless speed, was undone not by greater steel, but by simplicity on wheels. The Jeep, a half-ton silhouette against every horizon, rewrote what it meant to move in war. It carried no armor, bore no heavy cannon, and yet outmaneuvered empires that had once claimed mastery of motion. From the dunes of Tunisia to the frozen forests of the Ardennes, its small engine hummed like a heartbeat behind the Allied advance, steady, tireless, and unbroken. German officers who once dismissed it as a toy came to study its tracks with a mixture of disbelief and envy, realizing too late that adaptability had triumphed over precision. When the last convoys rolled home, paint dulled and bodies scarred by years of mud and salt, the Jeep had already become legend. It had turned the battlefield into a lesson in humility, proof that endurance outlasts brilliance, and that speed without resilience is only noise. The war that began with the thunder of panzers ended with the hum of engines built for persistence. Across every front it touched, the Jeep left more than tire marks. It left a philosophy. The dust trail first glimpsed by the 21st Panzer-Division in 1943 still hangs in history's light, faint but enduring, a line drawn by a humble machine that redefined victory itself.